Hello.
Hello, good to see you again.
I'm not by myself, by the way. I'm joined here by two of my colleagues from the project, Marjolein Steeman and Sam Alloing. Unfortunately, Marjolein just messaged me that she has some technical issues.
Okay.
So I'm afraid she won't be able to share her audio or her video. So Sam and I will take over the part that she was supposed to present. But in any way, Sam has joined us as well. Sam is from the Royal Dutch Library. Marjolein is from the Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision. And I am looking for a button to share my screen. And I think I found it. So here we go. What we want to present to you today is the result of a project that we ran with many more other people involved, in which we built what we call a smart guide to preferred formats. And this may sound a bit like abracadabra now, because what are preferred formats and what is smart about this guide, we will show you. For the context in which this project has run, it's good to know that we are looking from the perspective of archive institutes. And first impression you may have if you think about archives is that these are stuffy organizations with boxes full of paper. But nowadays, that's actually no longer the case. So many archival material has been digitized, and new material is often even born digital. And that means that one of the main missions of these institutes is what is called digital preservation. So maintain the archival material that is digitized for the long future. And that means that these institutes have to deal with file formats, the formats of the digital material that is stored and presented to the archive. Think of PDF, for example. This is one of these file formats, but you can also find files that have WordPerfect as their format. You can imagine that some of these files are easier to store, easier to maintain, easier to preserve than others. So archive institutes have policies for which types of files they prefer, which types of files they support, which types of files they maybe don't want, if they have a say in that, because they do need to provide to their target audience the services that they should provide as an archive institute, of course. And the guide that we've built is a guide that helps institutes in formulate this policy, but also share information about their policies. In this guide, you actually find three parts that collaborate, that work together. So there's, in the core of the guide, there's a registry that contains approximately 1900 file formats and information about these file formats. And we use that information in a step-by-step plan. That's an interactive wizard kind of component that institutes can use to gather information about the file formats that are relevant to them. And that information then again is used to fill their own institution page, in which they can share the information about the policies that they have. And to show you an example of the contents of this guide, if you go to this guide and you go to especially the registry, this is what you encounter, this type of information. So we're looking at a file format description here, Acrobat PDF 1.0. There are more versions of Acrobat PDF. This is the 1.0 version. And you see some metadata about this file format. You see the file format family that it belongs to, which is PDF. You see the application domain that this file format is used for, text. You see a couple of identifiers that link this information to other registries, and we'll talk about that more in due course. What you also see is some information about which institutes use this format in their policy. So you see that one institute has listed this as an accepted file format, and another institute has listed this as a legacy format. And especially the preferred formats is what institutes want to share information about. So how does this work? How do they get to these policy decisions using the information from the guide? Sam.
Yes. Can you skip go on in the slide so everything is shown on the screen? Thank you. So yeah, we have this is the step-by-step guide that you plan that you can follow, and you can give some information, can point out some information about how your archive once it believes a specific format is important to it, or the systems in the archive support a specific format. And that way you will give the importance in different aspects for that institution, and that means that you will go up in the axis or go down depending on how you answer this. So for example, here you see the importance of users for the Apple codec is medium, is high for the archive itself. For the systems, it's not very well supported in the systems of that archive, and it is high on a strategic, so it's important from the strategic point of view of the archive. So, and they can give some answers to the importance of all the formats that they have in their archive. In this example, it's Apple codec. They have bitmap, some bitmap pictures and JPEG, and that way you get a score. For example, for Apple codec it's 7, so it will be up in the importance level. And this is actually the subjective, to say subjective indication of importance for an archive that that is shown in this axis. In the other axis, in the next slide, you will see that the sustainability score is mentioned, and this is something that we use. We didn't fill out this information ourselves. We use information from the NARA, the National Archives of the United States, to give a number here based on different categories. They scored different formats on openness, on is the specification available, and they have some different aspects that are important to a format, and that will indicate how well you can preserve it for the future. Because if you have a specification and you can read the specification, it's easier to understand what is happening, or if you have to create an application that migrates, for example, a specific format to another format that is in the future better supported, for example. So if you have a Word file that there is no specification of that, but if you have to create a converter to another format, you have to try to develop a program with trial and error, and that's much different than if you have PDF, for example, where you have the specification available. Although it's still a hell of a job, of course, but it's more possible to do it like that than if you don't have a specification, and that influences the sustainability score. If you see zeros, like in Apple ProRes, the first example, that means that NARA didn't score that that format. But you see the next one, the wave examples score pretty high. You also see it on the plot. That means that they are good formats to preserve for the future. And combining these two axes will show up in the upper right corner, which are the most important formats for that archive and are preferred formats, probably. And that's what we want to help the institutions with, to suggest them and to help them select the best formats for them to preserve for the future and to select as preferred formats. Next slide, please.
So let's talk a bit about the technology that we use for this, and obviously there are many more extensions that are part of the software stack here. We've listed the most important ones, and let's first start by the observation that the guide that we run is not something that runs in isolation. So there are many other data sources that actually contain information that is complementary to, or even a source of, the information that we show in the guide. And some just refer to information from NARA, which you see here at the bottom. So these sustainability scores that they provide, we've actually used them together with some other information about relevant file formats as a primer to start the contents of this knowledge base. So the registry was filled through a one-time batch that we collected from other sources, that we adjusted, that we adapted, that we restructured so that it fits the use case that we want to support. And through the data transfer plugin extension by means of a one-time batch, we read that, we uploaded that to MediaWiki. And then, of course, on top of MediaWiki, we run Semantic MediaWiki. I think that's a no-brainer here in this conference. And on top of that, we have a couple of usual suspects. So we use page forms, we use external data, but we also use an extension called Sparkle Result Format. And we also have created some additional extensions, for example, the policy wizard that the institutes use to construct the plot that you just saw, which is fully constructed from information that the institutes provide, combined with information that is stored in the registry and then presented within the wiki. So the plot is actually presented in the wiki. That's an additional extension that we wrote and that runs on top of Semantic MediaWiki. So what you see on the right-hand side here is that there are a couple of web resources that we connect to. We connect to Wikidata, which is over here, and we do that by means of RDF. So that's what we use the Sparkle Result Format plugin for. And we also connect to something called Pronom, which is a registry of file formats. And they publish all the structured information in XML documents, and they are available on a predictable URL. So if we know the identity of a file format in Pronom, we can predict where we can find the XML. And through the external data extension, we read the XML, we process it, and we execute some XPath queries to present data in the smart guide to preferred formats. And here you see another external environment called Copter. And this is an environment that is related to file formats, but the focus is on the tools that you use to process these files. So they also use Wikidata IDs, for example, as do we, to identify the file formats that are input and output to certain tools. And this is also a Semantic MediaWiki, so we can do a API call here, process the JSON that comes out of it as external data, and also incorporate that in the pages in our own Semantic MediaWiki. So actually what we do here is we employ kind of a linked data structure with several sources of data that are all related to file formats, that all contain information that we are interested in. And we use several keys to query these remote sources. So for example, what we do in the registry is we store, I don't know where my mouse pointer is, but we store something called a PUID, a pronom unique identifier, which then maps to the file format ID in the XML structure that Pronom publishes. So the PUID is the key through which we query the XML and then process the XML via the external data extension and display the information again on pages in our wiki. We do something similar for Wikidata, but here, and maybe I should explain a little bit the structure that you see here. So there's a very shallow hierarchy that we use to structure the information in the registry. We start from what we call application domains, think text, audio, domains like that, in which we encounter format families. We just saw PDF as an example, but you can also think of GIF or BMP as an example of a format family. And then we have the actual file formats, which are usually versions of a file format. So PDF 1.0, PDF 2.0, PDF/A would all be part of the PDF format family. And so we make a distinction between format family and file format within those families. And so does Wikidata. So what you see here is that file format family is actually an entity type in Wikidata. Here you see the Q number, and file formats also have their own Q number as type. And we use these Wikidata IDs to link to Wikidata to query, in terms of Sparkle queries, the relevant information and display it again on the pages here in our own registry. So for example, what we don't store in our own registry is the official website or information about the developer. And if there is a match in Wikidata, we actually take that from the Wikidata source and show it to the viewer of parts of the registry on the relevant pages. We do something similar towards Copter, but there we have to do a little trick, because where we separate format families from formats, so PDF from PDF 1 and 2, Copter doesn't do that. So here you would typically encounter tools that have PDF as input or PDF as output. So in order to find the relevant tools, which are over here, we actually look for formats in Copter that could either be a file format or a format family. So we will search for the Wikidata ID, which is also an identifier, a key that Copter uses, for PDF 1.0, as well as PDF as a family. And if we find either of them, we're going to display that information on the file format page. So in this way, we are able to gather information from a heterogeneous set of sources that are all in one way or another relevant to the information that we want to share about the file formats. So
yes, and it's up to me. So like you saw in the slides from Remco, that we want to integrate with as much sources as possible instead of storing the data ourselves. We don't want to create yet another database with format information. So we took the decision from the beginning on to link to as much sources as possible and reuse as much of data as possible. But it's a great idea to have, but implementing it is a lot of work still. It's not that you have to do nothing and just link to the data. We had a lot of difficulties to solve to create the website that we have right now. Like already Remco showed, there is a different aggregation level, for example, between the source, different sources, like the Copter example that Remco showed. We have to add metadata to data to our website to create the links between the sources, because not every source has all the IDs. Maybe, or there are mistakes, and we have to solve the issues there ourselves. And also we used Pronom as our main source. So if some other database has more information about the form or more formats available in their database, and we couldn't reuse it. So we chose Pronom because it's in the digital preservation space, and an important database with file format information, and that's our primary source. But Wikidata, for example, already has some other formats that we don't have in our database. And yeah, that's the choice and the yeah, that's what, because if we made this choice, we had these consequences. But yeah, well, it's still better to link, we think, because otherwise we had to maintain all that data, and we don't want that, because you also see in sources that they start off with rich descriptions of their file format. And Pronom, for example, started off with adding lots of metadata and have lots of fields where they could add different information about the file format. But keeping that up to date is lots of work, and they couldn't keep up with that. So they have now the most important pieces for them available in their source, and that is what we also use. And we also think that we wouldn't be able to keep up with all the information that is needed to add to the file formats and to create new file formats. So it's not very good idea to create another database, but it's still better to link, and even though there are some disadvantages maybe. And yeah, we also think it's better to have less but well-maintained data than more data that is not maintained. Next slide, please. A different topic, but very important part of the guide is the knowledge sharing. That's why we created the guide for sharing the format policies between the institutions. On the left side, you will see format policies, or the formats that are selected by different institutions, where they have a preferred format. For example, in this case, PDF for some institutions like DANS. And that is where you can get an overview of the different preferred formats for different institutions, and then you can, for example, getting contact with an institution that has a specific preferred format, but where you don't have much information about yourself and you want to learn more about a file format, for example. That way you can come in contact with an institution that already chosen some file format as a preferred format, for example. So that way we want to improve the knowledge sharing between institutions, because that's important for the Dutch Digital Heritage Network, to get all the institutions that manage heritage to get a better understanding and a better knowledge level about file formats in this case. And on the right side, you see then the institution. Oh no, sorry, yeah, next slide. Yeah, and also improving knowledge is also very important. That's why the expert group, that's the group that created the guide and is also maintaining the guide from a content perspective, of course. The expert group also answers questions from the community to improve the knowledge, and also brings in contact different institutions so that they can exchange knowledge, because the expert group, of course, doesn't know everything, but they may know some other institution who has a specific file format or specific knowledge about the file format. And a third important part of the expert group is follow, of course, everything that happens around file formats, and updating the guide for that, and help understand what the meaning is of different events around file formats for the community. Next slide, please. So then the next steps, to close, we want to do better community building from now on, because we created the guide, and now we want, of course, institutions to start using the guide. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we cannot have the physical meetings, but we want to have physical meetings next year where we can explain to the community in detail the new guide and that they can start using it. We also want to improve the guide ourselves because we made mistakes during adding the data, or we also saw that there are sources that are updated that we need to update ourselves because we added some data. We have to maintain the links there, so we have to update that information as well. And we also want to provide back to the sources that we use because we added some information to make the website work, and we want to contribute that back to the source because then we don't have to maintain the data ourselves, and they can improve their own source as well. So that's also something that we think is very important and we want to do as a next step. And that was our talk, I believe. Are there any questions?
Do we have time for questions, or does everyone want to eat?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We indeed have time. My plan is to shorten the break so that we can continue at 7. But of course, now we can, if there are questions, we can shorten the break, and whoever wants to leave already can leave. I don't see questions in the chat, except for my own one. So my own one would be, you mentioned a policy wizard extension that you wrote.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any plans on making that available somewhere, or is it already?
So it is really tied into the structure, the knowledge model of this particular application. So we don't have any plans to release it as a reusable extension or in any way. We don't think that's feasible because of the way that it's really tied into the actual properties that we use, the exact hierarchy that we use, etc. So no.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any further questions.
Neither do I. Or will there be records at YouTube?
Oh yes, there will be. It will take some time because the recordings are done automatically. So in the main sessions there's just a recording, and after the conference we have to cut this down to individual talks and upload it to YouTube. So it will take a week or two until we get that done. But yes, there will be everything on YouTube. Okay, so then thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting in my opinion, and we are now happy to enjoy a short break, and we'll be back here at 7 o'clock. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you everyone for your attention.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.